So, and David Gwynn is our state coordinator. He's also a master naturalist. He's originally from the North Dallas area. Now he's down in Houston. Got to play in the snow, and but his background is much more lovely for us. So we want to get you guys in and out as quick as possible. We are recording. I'll send out the recording link when I'm able to get it. I'm using the Texas A&M agricultural website, so I may have to work with a few people there, but I think we're ready to go. So I'm going to admit a few more people in, and it's all yours, David.
Okay, well, thank you so much, everyone. Can everybody hear me? Are we good? Tina, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, and everybody can see a screen in play mode. So is everything good there?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Well, first, let me say thank you all for making your evening available for me to do this. I'm going to apologize ahead of time that y'all are kind of a guinea pig. Cross Timbers Master Naturalist will be the first chapter to go through what has already been scheduled as 13 of these sessions, 4 of which will be in North Texas over the next 5 weeks, I think. But they are spread out all over the state. Many of them, after we finish with North Texas, will move to Central and the Gulf Coast. But we're excited to be doing this. I'm going to apologize also that I'm going to be going very fast. What this presentation represents is me having taken about a 3-hour workshop and condensed it down into what I hope is very close to an hour or so. So please bear with me. If you have questions, please put those questions in the chat, and I promise that I will stay on this call till all of your questions are answered. I'll be moving very quickly through the presentation, so feel free to jot down questions you have, and we'll get those answered as we move through. Tina mentioned that I am a master naturalist. I actually was a very early master naturalist. I actually went through the program in 2005, certified in the spring of 2005 with the North Texas chapter. Since that time, I've been able to be an active member of 4 different chapters in the state in 4 different ecoregions. So I went from North Texas to the Brazos Valley, Bryan College Station, then from there to the San Antonio area and New Braunfels, and then before going back to North Texas, and then now being down here as part of the Gulf Coast chapter. So I have enjoyed it immensely and have made myself kind of learn each ecoregion as I went. So great to have this time to share with you as part of the the Cross Timbers ecoregion, and you're part of Texas up in Tarrant County. So with that, let me jump into this. A little bit about this. You're going to get to learn a little bit about some of the administrative side of Time to Restore. Time to Restore is actually a project, and the project is meant to inform climate smart plantings for pollinators in the face of climate change. And so what's happening is we know climate change is occurring, but we don't have really good data to demonstrate kind of what is the effect of that. And so this project was funded by the federal government to help us collect data that would make it more meaningful in terms of restoration for pollinators and the projects that are in the South Central US, which is the 4 states of Louisiana, Texas, New Mexico, and Oklahoma. A little bit about our agenda today. I'm going to hope to give you a little bit of background on the Time to Restore project and how we got to this point. Tina mentioned that Texas is new to the project. We are the 4th state to be added. So Oklahoma, New Mexico, and Louisiana went before us because they were much smaller and easier to bring online. Texas just joined the project this past August with the kickoff of a workshop that many of you may have participated in. And we're excited to now be rolling out the data collection side of the project. Also going to talk a little bit about the priority nectar species. As you know, Texas is a very diverse state and a very large state. And so the other states in the project had actually been working with 8 species of plants. We've broadened that to try to allow for as much of Texas to participate in this project. Also going to be talking about the Time to Restore tools that we use to collect and report data. the basics of data collection, and then some resources and how you can get access to those, and then where we go from here. So that's kind of the agenda. I probably don't have to tell you as master naturalists that our state is extremely diverse. In fact, of the 4 states in the South Central region, Texas probably is the most diverse. So as we get into the project, you're going to see a definite skew towards the eastern half of the state. So if you drew a line from Wichita Falls on this map down to Laredo, you'll notice that many of the plants and many of our investment and time is being focused on really the eastern half of the state, because that's where the large population centers are and where we can hope to get volunteers to help us roll this project out and collect data to support it. Also, probably don't have to tell you that changes are coming. We are already seeing that. There are more extreme climate demonstrations in our state, almost with every passing year. And here in Houston is no example. We had a rather significant snowstorm earlier this week and left 4 inches of snow here at my home, which I would have never believed was possible. Last time an event like that even got close was in 2017, and I think it was 2 inches. So we can expect to see increasing temperatures and really more extreme types of weather demonstration. Probably also fewer days with rain, but when we do get rain, we will see heavier rain events across the state. How that is impacting our natural world and the natural environment, we don't really have a real grasp on. We know there is impact. We don't yet know what the data tells us that the depth and scope of that impact is. One of the tools that we use to monitor and assess that change is phenology. Phenology, many people don't know what phenology is, but phenology is the phenomena that occurs with seasonal events, the timing of plant and animal seasonal events, and the relationship they have with climate. So you can look at plants flowering, seed production are major phenology events that are seasonally linked. But also almost all animals go through some type of phenology phenomena as well. Deer in rut, the spring births, those types of coat changes, those are all types of phenological change. And so this project is trying to assess and collect data on phenological change as it relates to native plants and the pollinators they rely on. Very quickly, seasonal events in plants are driven by a number of characteristics and drivers. These are the 5 big ones, but there are lots of others that impact when a plant will demonstrate flowering. And you can automatically understand and recognize that warmth and rainfall, day length, are the big ones that climate change is really impacting right now. We've already started to see data that tells us this is occurring. And so what we don't yet understand is really how it's impacting other species that rely on those flowering plants. And this is a study, I'll share this very quickly with you. This is a study that was commissioned by the United Nations Environmental Program. And what it shows you is that we have very definite, that very first, those first 2 variables are very definite notices of plant flowering and leaf unfolding almost 5 days earlier across the globe than where they had been previously. So we already see that. What's less pronounced is what the impact it's having on insects, ungulates, fish, birds, and bats, which are the animals that often interact with those plants. So you can see there's a definite connection there. We don't yet know how that's happening. Largely, and we can assume from this study, largely it's happening earlier now. And so we don't know what that means for insects and pollinators as those plants start to flower and unfold their leaves much earlier than they had originally done. Here's a study. Nature's Notebook is a tool we'll be talking about later, but I wanted to show you this study. This is a previous study that was done before this project was kicked off that actually was tracking milkweed and when it was blooming in the Northeast. And they were able to document through that study that we had almost 7 days earlier of flowering of this common milkweed in the Northeast. The really interesting thing is it didn't change the initial growth of the plant or the seed ripening. So that's a very interesting predicament to be in when the flowering is occurring sooner, but the setting of seed is not. And what does that mean for the insects that rely on that plant? Most notably the monarch, right? As we get into this conversation about pollinators, you're going to see that there's a lot of other variables that drive when those pollinators arrive. But if the plants are blooming sooner and the pollinators are not, you can very clearly start to see that the cycles will soon be off, and that could really start to impact us in a number of ways that we really need to understand as we move forward with particular pollinator restoration projects across the country. Here's a bit of a study that was done that shows that we know that the flowering and the insects are showing up earlier, but we don't know what the impact to the insect is. So if the insect, for instance, bees that rely on a collection of pollen in flowers, what's happening to those native bees? We know there's a large troubling situation with insects, but we don't know what's happening between them as it relates to these phenological studies and cycles. Lots of questions are asked. There's lots of questions that are still out there. Which species are becoming mismatched is probably one of the biggest that we're trying to get a hold of here of late, because we've started to talk about the monarch, we started to talk about the bumblebee. Those are animals that clearly are tied to flowering plants, and we don't yet have a real good understanding of kind of what that mismatch is happening. We do know, and I'll switch over here, we do know a lot about certain species of pollinators and what they seem to require or need in terms of their plant species and the flowering that occurs there. So we have a pretty good understanding of kind of what bats need, what bees need, what beetles need, and what they're drawn to. But we don't have a real good idea of what happens when that timing gets thrown off. If the days are warmer and the flowers are appearing earlier, but the insects aren't ready to take advantage of it, what does that mean? I tell you all this because really what we're trying to get to is we need more data. Data will drive us in our ability to make policy decisions that will help restoration projects and ultimately probably play a big part in agriculture and how we address climate change as it relates to food production and any number of other things that impact us, particularly here in the south central part of our country. Introducing our team, I mentioned that this project is part of a four-state project in the south central part of the U.S. So there's New Mexico, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and now Texas. The other states actually came online over the last 18 months. Texas was reserved till the end because it was so large. We conducted a workshop in August and began this process. So we're really excited to have partnered with a number of organizations to do the project and to bring Texas into the process. I should also tell you that funding was provided from the federal government through the South Central Climate Adaptation Science Center to fund the project for a 3-year period. So that helps us set the project up and really kind of do these kinds of trainings to move the project forward. There are a number of questions this project hopes to address, and I've only isolated just 3 here that are particularly salient as they relate to kind of what we do as master naturalists. And so The intent of this is to help researchers understand what's happening to pollinators and native plants in the face of climate change. But we're also hoping to use this data to inform all kinds of restoration projects, pollinator restoration projects that are occurring all over the country with this data. So you'll see as we get into it, you'll start to see that certain parts of the data are being collected, and you'll better understand how they might inform as we move forward. Another one that's especially particular for us in this effort is when should we be harvesting seed, and are there bloom periods that we could cater to with certain species that would help lengthen the pollinator cycle. Many of y'all are aware that many plants bloom on different cycles throughout the year. And we're wondering if we might be able to inform pollinator restoration through just getting word out about how to mix and develop wildscapes and monarch way stations and other restoration projects to help inform those program managers. With that, I'll go ahead and jump into time to restore in Texas. I mentioned that the other three states have already kicked off their efforts. Texas is by far the biggest, and it was delayed because of that fact. I was hired back in the summer to help assist with the workshop planning and to do these kinds of training so that people understand the project, do community outreach, and then help set up sites and data collection sites all across the state. The process originally started with a workshop that we did in August. We had about almost 600 participants in 2 different workshops. Many of you may have had the opportunity to participate in that. The main deliverable in that workshop was to get to an assessment of which species we should focus on, which native plant species needed to be focused on. We've now moved beyond that. We've set those species, and we're now moving into the data collection phase, which is what this presentation actually is meant to help y'all do, and will help many other chapters across the state as we focus on data collection and really building data that will help researchers and program managers understand a bit more about what's going on in our state. The beauty of what you're doing or being asked to help do is that all of this data will feed into helping to provide input and shape what kinds of deliverables come out of it. So you can expect that your data not only will help decision makers that are trying to understand climate change, but it will also help us frame up how those deliverables should be packaged as we disseminate them back out to people who are doing wildscapes and native gardens and working on natural areas across the state, really across the country. And then obviously there will be a feedback cycle that will go through this. So we're asking that volunteers participate in the collection of data here, but we're also hoping that you'll stay connected to us so that we can build a team, an army, if you will, that are very in tune with the native plants and their pollinators and how those two are interacting as we move forward with the project. Time to Restore is a project that's been funded for 3 years, but Nature's Notebook as a tool has been going on for much longer and will continue on after Time to Restore has evolved into whatever it will become as we move forward with this effort. Down at the bottom, you'll notice there's a note there about quarterly calls. At the end of this presentation, there will be an opportunity for you to join, if you're not already, the informational network that notifies about quarterly calls we do to just talk about where we're at with the project and how the project's moving forward. Up to this point, and I've done now 4 of the quarterly calls, Texas has by far been the largest contingent to show up, and that's because we have such an active database of both volunteers as well as master naturalists across the state that are interested in these types of projects and these types of efforts. I mentioned that we originally, the 4 states that were decided by the project, the first 3, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and New Mexico, had already kicked off the project about 18 months, 2 years ago. And they all focused on 8 plant species, and these are the 8 plants: the wild bergamot, cardinal flower, common sunflower, showy milkweed, green antelope horn milkweed, buttonbush, eastern purple coneflower, and tall blazing star. Now, I know y'all are in North Texas, but if you look at this plant, these 8 species, there's a few of them that work, but most of these are very difficult in many of the parts where we have large population centers that could do data collection. And so one of my first recommendations to the program administrators at the University of Arizona was, let's look at the species that are currently being used, these 8, but let's also look at what we might be able to add to this list that would increase the amount of activity and bring a larger part of Texas into the data collection fold. And so we did that. We took these 8 species. I then took a list, started working on a list from the NIPSOT plant list. Many of y'all are familiar with those. They cover all the ecoregions of the state, but I focused on those that covered the most populous areas. So really the Hill Country, North Texas, East Texas, and the Gulf Coast were my primary focus. I took those plant lists. I identified species that were known to be widely distributed across the state and also commercially available, because I know many of the master naturalists are actively involved in planting their own wildscapes. And so we wanted to be able to build a bridge that not only could you find the species in the wild, but you could also find them in many wildscapes and planted gardens. And so that really impacted which species came off of that NIPSOT list. I then cross-referenced that list with the LBJ Wildflower Centers database for distribution and bloom time. And I'm going to show you a bit of a matrix that I developed that shows when those plants are in bloom, and so that we could then use that to inform how we selected the species. And then the last cross-reference I made was with the Xerces Society in regards to the pollinators that were reliant on those species that we were about to consider. Originally, we had about 35 species. We needed to get that down to about 25. We ultimately got it down to about 29 species, and I'll go ahead and share those with you. There are 29 species. This is a list of them, and I'll be happy to send this list to Tina. Y'all, you may have it, but if not, I'll make sure you get a copy so you can distribute it to everyone on the call. This is the final Texas list of priority plant species. It was, like I said, it was established in September of 2024. The 8 species in orange are the 8 that were carried over from the other 3 states. And all of the black ones are species that were added to the list as they came out of the workshop we held, the 2 workshops we held in August. The interesting thing about this list is that there is I think 4 species of milkweed on this list because of the diversity of milkweed in Texas. But there's also 2 verbencinas, I think. There's a number of species. There's 2 mist flowers. You'll see that the preponderance of the new species really was meant to try to focus on plants that people used in wildscapes and in native gardens so that we could make the data collection as easily accessible as possible for active volunteers. So a little bit about this table, I should point out to you, the distribution column just identifies which states this plant is known to naturally occur. So if you got 4, that was a really high ranking for that species. If it only covered 2, it was more difficult. It didn't mean it didn't make the list and fell off, but it was much more favored if all 4 or at least 3 of the states had the species occurring naturally as a plant. The next column in red shows you when that plant species is in bloom. It's no coincidence that they're meant to be overlapping and they're meant to cover as much of the year as possible. And the reason why those species have been focused in this project is because we're trying to maximize the amount of time that pollinators have access to species particularly when those species are critical for pollinator processes. So the next column is the benefit nectar column. That is if there's a Y in that column, it shows that species is a definite known nectar contributor to some form of pollinator that's fairly widely spread across the state. The next column for the SVTMB is a species that's important to native bees. So if that plant species has been known by the Xerces Society or measured by the Xerces Society to be of particular importance to native bees, it's been signified by NB. If it has a NB and a BB, the BB stands for bumblebees, which are, we all know bumblebees are having a very difficult time now, particularly in Texas. And then the last one is HB, which is honeybees. So if you had 3 in that column, that meant that plant species was extremely important as a focal species in this study. Okay, and so it shouldn't be surprising to anybody that native bees, because there are so many of them across the continent, really weighed in heavily on this plant species that entered into the project priority list. The next column is the nest material or structure. These are plant species that actually provide something other than flowers to a particular pollinator. I think Eastern redbud and Texas thistle made that list. At the end of this, I'll ask you if you know what nest structure those 2 species help and test your ability as a master naturalist, make it a little fun. The next column is species. These are species that are known to help other species that are reliant. Let's see, make sure I'm reading this right. That are special value to native. Excuse me. My note. I lost my note there. Those are species that plant species that help non-pollinators that are important for pollinator existence and furtherance. And these are usually wasps. I'll be honest with you, most of these are milkweed species. I don't know if y'all know this, but a lot of wasps are heavily reliant on milkweed, and as such, they tend to keep predators away while butterflies and other types of pollinators are using the milkweed. So we noted that on here as well. And then that last NN column there, y'all, just shows you as we get into the tools here that we're talking about, Nature's Notebook, there are a number of species that are already in Nature's Notebook, but when we added our extra species, the 21 other species, many of them were not in Nature's Notebook yet. Hopefully in the next 6 weeks, they will be added and it will be seamless, but I'm pointing it out right now because if you were to go ahead and set up your Nature's Notebook profile, there would be a bit of a problem because those species are not yet in the system, but they will be shortly. Okay. Like I said, I'll make sure you have a copy of this, but I wanted to bring it to your attention and show you that there should be a number of species on this list that work for you and your particular potential site. And we'll be coming back to this as we move along. Okay. So collecting data for the project. We mentioned that the project really is meant to be a data collection effort. That's why master naturalists are natural volunteers under the effort and for the program. And so collecting data for the project is very easy. The biggest thing that I want to share with y'all today is it doesn't have to be huge. You can literally set up your project to be one plant that's on that list that you track on a regular basis, and you would be a full contributor to the project. Okay, so an individual flower or patch of flowers absolutely counts, absolutely works, and we are thrilled to get it. So in fact, I usually recommend everybody to start off small because it can be very overwhelming if you try to take off too much when you start. The other characteristic that's really exciting about this project is that this is an activity that's meant to be done with others. There are many of these sites that can be set up with a team. So if you have a team that works on a wildscape, There's nothing wrong with having all of those individuals collect the data. In fact, you can take turns collecting the data. You can do it as a team. We have a number of wildlife refuges along the coast that do it as a team because the refuges themselves are so large. So a group can actually do this, and it works fairly well. Another thing that's really exciting about the project is you can do it in your own yard. So many of our projects require that you go to a nature preserve or to some other location, but you can actually set up this project in your yard, even in your flower bed. It does not take a large piece of dirt to do this. All that it requires is that you be using and tracking one of those 29 species that we're interested in with the project. Okay. Switching a little bit to the tools, there are two tools that can be used to collect data for the project. And this has been somewhat confusing here of late because a lot of people are already familiar with iNaturalist. And iNaturalist will let you collect data, phenological data now. In fact, we had a training yesterday, many of you may have seen it, that actually showed you that iNaturalist is now collecting phenological data in terms of the photo observations that you make. And what that does is when you take that photo and upload it to iNaturalist, you can actually annotate that photo and say it's blooming or it has seed. And that makes it a bit of a phenological phenomenon. The challenge with iNaturalist is that it doesn't allow for ongoing collection of data for the same plant or the same area, right? Because iNaturalist is really meant to be a point in time, whereas Nature's Notebook, which is the tool that we produce, it lets you set up a site and track it over time, which gives you that time reference that's so critical when you're trying to understand climate change, okay? So let me deal with the iNaturalist part. If for some reason you didn't want to do Nature's Notebook and you already are an iNaturalist user, you could very easily just do iNaturalist like you do during a BioBlitz or any number of the other efforts that you use iNaturalist for. We suggest that you go in and join the Time to Restore project, which you will find in iNaturalist. Just do a search on the search line, and it will tell you, you'll see Time to Restore project. You can join that project, and then you just do iNaturalist as you normally do. When you see a species, you take a picture of it. You don't even have to necessarily focus on the 29 species. In fact, in the background, we will pull just those 29 species. So the only really caveat that you have to make when you're doing iNaturalist is you really need to focus on flowers and fruits in your photos. Because if you don't take a flower or fruit, we won't be able to capture that those phenological phenomenon have occurred. But like it shows on the graphic here, you don't need to establish a site, which you do in Nature's Notebook. You also don't need to categorize your observation. You literally just take it and upload it to iNaturalist like you do normally. And then, of course, the big one is you don't have to ever return to that plant. And that's where Nature's Notebook is very different, okay? So let me switch over to Nature's Notebook because it's the one we really prefer that you use. And I think you'll see why when I kind of talk about kind of what Nature's Notebook does. Nature's Notebook is a desktop website application that you can use your computer to go to and build your site that way. But most people use it as the app. The app is free. You can download it onto your phone just like you do with iNaturalist. And what it will do is it will let you create sites and identify species that you are going to track and on an ongoing basis. And so what we normally do, in fact, that QR code there, y'all, and I'll be happy to share that with you later, let you know that we're actually working on enhancing the app right now. So if you have an interest in doing that, please feel free to join the group. We'd love to have you. But this is the face of the app that would show up on your phone, okay? Once you've downloaded the app, then you go in and select the site. We suggest that you select a site that's convenient make it fairly representative and uniform, and then an appropriate size. If you are only going to track the native plants, the size can be extremely small. It can be your flower bed. That can be your site. You will identify it by the address or the GPS coordinates, and that would be your site, and you're good to go. We do ask that your site be fairly uniform. For instance, if it's a very diverse site, it makes it very difficult for you to collect data in a very easily identifiable way. And so I think the maximum under the guidelines is 15 acres. So most sites are much smaller than that. I personally have 7 sites that I manage, and all of them are fairly small. I think the largest one is about a half an acre. And that's because I have selected species that work together for that particular site. I also share with you all of my sites are urban. So I have 4 parks that I manage the data collection for the wildscapes in those parks. And then I have a greenway and 2 other locations that I also tracked. And then I do my own residential wildscape. So please don't think that you have to go out and find a very wild, Fort Worth Nature Center, the entire site. No, you actually, I suggest that you draw a line around the plant species that you're going to monitor and call that your site, which is very easy to do. Once you've set up your site in iNaturalist, and it's a very easy thing to do, it's about 6 or 7 questions that ask you to identify the address of your site and tell us a little bit about it. Is it a planted site? Is it a naturally occurring site? Those kinds of things. The next thing you do is then you select the plants, the plants from the species list that you will be tracking. And that's a fairly easy thing to do. I mean, you look at the plants that are on that list and where you have them in your site, and then you just identify them. These are 2, the circles drawn around these are penstemon. I think the others are poppies, but you could very easily set up 2 penstemon plants that you're going to track, and then a poppy patch. I put this a slide in here so that you can see. You can also do a patch. It doesn't have to be a plant. It can be a patch. In fact, I find sunflowers are easier to do as a patch. Monarda is also very easy to do as a patch. And then you list these in Nature's Notebook as the plants you're going to track with your data collection. Each species, and I usually recommend that you only do 2 or 3. You don't have to do a whole list. You don't have to track every native plant in your site. Just pick a couple, 3 that you're interested in, and put those into your system and into your site. Now, I'll also share with you in Nature's Notebook, unlike iNaturalist, you also can identify other species that you want to be part of your site. And what I mean there is if you're a butterfly person, there are a number of butterflies in Nature's Notebook that you could also track on your site. For instance, on mine, I have a default list. I add 12 non-plant species to each of my sites. 3 of them are birds, 3 of them are butterflies, 3 of them are other insects, and 3 of them are mammals. And the reason why I do that is because I believe that all of these species are tied together. And as we try to understand climate change, understanding whether those other species are there and present in your site when you're collecting data could be very important to researchers as we move forward with the project. Now, I will also share with you that the 12 species I add are also fairly common. I think the 3 bird species I use are the cardinal, the northern mockingbird, and the robin. Those are on all my sites. And that is the big driver in terms of how big your site is. Because if you're just using a flower bed, you probably want to focus on insects in your site because they'll be easier to spot if they're there. Birds, if you're using birds, you probably want to use your yard to have a big enough space to note whether they're there. You do not have to use in your site any other species than the native plants on our target list, but I do think it adds something as you collect the data. And I can answer any questions about that as we get towards the end of this, but I wanted to point that out because I think a lot of people enjoy it when they add these other species to their Nature's Notebook site. Mentioned that you could do patches, you can do individual plants. And the beauty of Nature's Notebook is you can do annual plants. So everybody knows sunflowers die at the end of the year. That's okay. In Nature's Notebook, you can identify when a plant dies and add a new plant that you're going to track with the next season. So that's really kind of a critical and interesting thing. In terms of monitoring frequency, we hope that you will monitor at least weekly during the start of flowering and during peak flowering season. And the reason why is what we're trying to do is we're trying to assess a point in time when flowering does start for your plant, and then when peak flowering sets. And then, obviously, if you can monitor fruit setting and those kinds of things, that's also important. But this is why having your site be fairly close to home can really make a difference, okay? I mentioned that the more frequent you do, the better the data will be in terms of when that flowering actually occurred. So for instance, the little graphic that just popped up, if you're only going out there every week, the gap in terms of when that flowering actually started could be much broader than if you're going out there every 3 days and all of a sudden you notice there's full open flowers, which then makes the data set much more valuable. Now, you probably figured out that the really exciting part about this is that of the 29 species on that flowering targeted list for pollinators, many of them are spring, summer, or fall bloomers. So if you, for instance, knew you were not going to be able to collect data in the summer, you might select species in your site that are spring blooming or fall blooming. For instance, if you're also, if you're a teacher and you go on vacation during the summers every year, probably not a good plant species if it blooms during the summer. And so you can kind of think through that as you add plants to your site, okay? The time commitment, we recommend that you start very small. Choose 2-3 species maximum from that list. Visit your plants once a week, more if possible, and record your observations. Remember, as you start out, the app will ask you very simple questions. Are there flowers? Are there buds? Are the flowers open? Does it have fruit? Are the fruit ripe? And it's a series of yes/no questions. As you go into Nature's Notebook and collect data over a longer period of time, you will get better and better about being able to assess what's actually happening. And so the beauty of this project is as you collect as you're comfortable doing. If the question, you don't quite understand the question, skip it. It doesn't hurt the data set. But over time, you will get better and better at this. And it won't be very long before the data you collect will become incredibly valuable for the researchers and the decision makers that are using it to make decisions. I mentioned that monitoring frequency can be driven by season. These are, 8 species on the list that you can see. If you're going to be out the summer, probably want to stay away from purple coneflower, right? Because that's the peak of when it's really active. Might want to focus on a species that's maybe like a blazing star, which really doesn't start blooming until the fall. But you can use that list to build your site that works with your schedule, that really kind of puts you at the time when that data is really needed to be collected, okay? This is an illustration that shows you kind of the more frequent you collect your data, the better it can be for us. However, whatever you can do will be helpful, particularly if you're using Nature's Notebook, okay? It really helps us close in when that flower is actually blooming, and then we can pinpoint actually where your location is. And that will help us to understand what's happening to that particular native plant species in terms of its availability for pollinators. Okay. Here's another one that shows you what happens as intensity over time progresses and more plants, more and more of that plant are opening its flowers. If you're out there on a regular basis, it really starts to impact the data, and the data really starts to become very valuable for researchers that are looking at it. Little bit of an exercise here. We use these, most people, when we start talking about phenology, one of the things that's very interesting is that most people know, because they, if you're a master naturalist and you manage your own wildscape, you've learned how to recognize when your plants are doing different things. So this is a series of 6 photos for Turk's cap, which is very popular across the state in wildscapes. But you can see that these are different demonstrations of phenological phenomena for this species. And these have been jumbled. I'll tell you kind of what we use is to illustrate the plant and how it's moves across time that you would be recording in your Nature's Notebook app. Here's another one with the common buttonbush. You can see as that plant sets bud in B, it then moves to C where there's an open flower, but there's still some buds. It would then move to F, which is really kind of both buds and open flowers. Open flowers are the preponderance. Then we move to D, where the flowers start to fade. Then A, where you have ripening fruit, and then E, where you have mature fruit. So see how those photos are changing. If you were doing these observations, you would be recording this phenomena as it's changing in your app. If you're out there on a fairly regular basis, this really becomes very important in the data set. And then this is the last one I have here, which is also Eastern Redbud. You can see it does a very similar type progression as well that you could then note as you were collecting data. Okay. As you move through Nature's Notebook and as you get better and better at data collection here and the importance of the data you're collecting, you also learn intensity. So phenophasing has what we call intensity, and that's the whole idea of how much blooming is occurring on your plant. Now, I usually recommend when you're starting out, don't focus on this because this can be very overwhelming. It takes time to learn how to assess how much intensity of a bloom is happening or a seed display is happening. But there are in Nature's Notebook the ability to collect this kind of data as you get better as a volunteer. Okay. Same thing, here's fruits. One of the questions in Nature's Notebook will ask you to assess fruit. Is fruit present? How much fruit's present on your subject plant, okay? You'll also, as you get better, there's, you can do the intensity of, if you had this Monarda, this is Monarda, common bergamot, actually. If you were to try to assess the intensity here, we have a tool that will let you identify a section that's about 15 flower heads. And then you can say there's about 10 of those. And then that way you can estimate the number of flower heads in terms of intensity that exist on this plant in your site. The exciting thing here is you wouldn't be doing one plant. You would say this is a patch of Monarda. And so you could then measure the intensity of that. But I don't want to scare you off with the intensity. The intensity can come later. There's also some things that you'll also be aware of. Many of you that know plants, you'll be aware of this. For instance, this is Monarda. Anybody that has ever participated in seed harvesting knows that Monarda, the seed heads are actually a composition of what are called nutlets. And those are individual fruits that were produced by the plant. Well, estimating this amount can be very problematic. And so if it becomes too difficult and you know it has mature fruit, you just don't know how many, skip it. It is not critical that we have all of the questions asked. Just answer the ones that you're most comfortable answering. And over time, you will get better at it. We also will provide training as we go that will let you get better at it. You can drop in on webinars and get info sheets that will help you learn more about plants and their phenophasing. In fact, at the end of this presentation, I'll give you an opportunity to take a picture of a QR code that if you will go in, provide your name and email address, I will send you a botany guide that will help you understand what's happening to plants at different points so that you better understand that whole process. Okay. I mentioned training resources. We have an online training course that you can actually go through to learn more about how to understand and document phenological phenomena and collect data as part of this project. So do not feel like this is all the training you're going to get. I did tell you that this actually, I have condensed this down, and it probably sounds that way, from a 3-hour workshop to what I'm trying to deliver in an hour. So you can appreciate that there's a lot of other stuff. I'll also share with Tina that if at any point your group wants me to come back and talk about specific elements, I can absolutely do that. That will make it a lot more easy to understand and work. We also send out info sheets. So we can send out info sheets on any of the 29 species that will help you learn more about that plant and what's happening over time. We also will include in there what species are pollinators are heavily reliant on that species and when to watch for them in case you want to add them into your site and the data collection efforts that you have underway. What's next? So usually what I say is what's next is hosting a virtual or in-person training. Tina has already set that up for y'all. So kudos to Tina and all she's done to get us to this point. Like I said, I will be very happy to continue to do this for as much time as y'all need. I'm actually on staff with the University of Arizona National Phenological Network to provide this training to Texas groups and individuals that are interested in helping with the project. So I'm at your service. Remember, the big difference with Nature's Notebook is you're observing the same plants at the same site over time. And that's the big difference here. That's what makes Nature's Notebook really valuable. But if for some reason Nature's Notebook doesn't work for you, you can absolutely join the Time to Restore project in iNaturalist and just go about collecting your photos in iNaturalist like you normally do and then upload them. It would be helpful if you annotated them when you did that, because then we would at least know if there was a flower or fruit, and they will be used that way as well. But if you can, Nature's Notebook is the preferred route only because it's a much more sustained effort over a longer period of time. And then the last thing I ask of y'all is to promote your project, promote the project, and let me know how I can assist. Texas is a very diverse state. It's a very big state. And getting the word out has really helped. I know that through Tina's efforts, Tom's also on this call. Tom's efforts, we will be doing one of these next week for the Elm Fork chapter. And then in 2.5, 3 weeks, I'll be doing one for Blackland Prairie. So as you can see, we're going to be moving across the state with the project. Hopefully this presentation will get smoother as we go. And I apologize once again for it being so choppy, but I wanted to try to get something that was ready for y'all that fit within the hour window that I had. With that, I will give you my name. I mentioned earlier that if you will take a picture of that QR code that's on the screen right now and go to it and give me your name and email address, I will send you a digital copy of what we call a botany primer that you can then use as you collect data that will help explain what's happening with that plant and where it's at in its phenophasing. Okay, that email will also let you sign up for those quarterly calls if you would like to be connected to the project over the long term. It's a great way to do that as well. In fact, I think it even asks you if you would like for that to also occur. But either way, please sign up for the Botany Primer, because if you have an interest in plants and particular plants that are important to pollinators, it's a very helpful guide. and I'll be happy to send you it as a PDF. With that, I'll stop, Tina. And if there's, I'd be happy to answer any questions or field anything that you have in that regard.
But no, not, I think just a couple things for the group. Yeah, what I plan to do is let everyone kind of digest this, maybe look at Nature's Notebook, start thinking about those plants, start thinking about your site, and then I'll get us on just a working call where we can talk through, oh, what about, why have all this Monarda? Let's do that. It's like, I'm raising green milkweed. I'm going to do that. And also talk about teams. Like you had mentioned, if you're going to be off, we had talked about, at a number of these sites, there's volunteers there every week. And if I can't be there to look at it that week, I've got 2 or 3 people I can holler and say, take a look at it and enter it in Nature's Notebook. So I would like, if we're going to do some teams, would they all be set up as the same site? Should we just say, White Settlement, Way Station, that kind of thing? Should we kind of coordinate it that way?
I think, and I tell this to everybody, select the site that's easiest for you to access and the one that you will keep with over a longer period of time. So typically, if you have to drive somewhere, that starts to become problematic.
No, we don't want that.
And so if that's why doing this in your yard is a great way to kick off the effort. I have my yard, and then I have some public sites. So I've done both as I've kind of progressed with the project.
Yeah, but we've got a place, Molly Holler Wildscapes, where there are volunteers that come every single week, and they're interested. They'll join as a team and pick the flowers they want or the patch that they want, and then they'll own it. We can do things like get flags to mark them. I mean, we can do fun stuff with flags too. I think about Sheldon Cooper, fun with flags. But
I'll give you a secret here, Tina. So we're working on some aluminum flags that you can then put on your plants. So once you create a site in Nature's Notebook, I'm going to periodically go back through. I have the ability to see your sites as you set them up. And once you set them up and I have an idea of which plants you've selected, I'm going to be reaching out to active participants in the projects to send them Nature's Notebook tags that you can put on those plants to reference them so that you know which ones to come back to.
Yeah, I also have administrator rights because I took the leadership course and I finished the observers course. The observers course is great, you guys. It's real. They're very short modules, like 30 minutes. I would read it. You take a quiz. If they're pretty good, easy to answer. If you do miss one, you just redo it and get it until you get it right. And you'll get the certification. And we do have approved AT hours for that. So even better.
Yeah, even better to be able to do a project that really helps us better understand climate change in your yard. There's so many projects you have to drive to do. This is one that's very easy. It can be your flower bed out front.
Right.
As long as you have one of those species, you could be an active participant in this project.
Exactly. And a lot of us are going to do our yards. So I've already started. I got mine started last August after the training. So
very good. Yeah, I immediately jumped on it, even though most of what's been occurring hasn't really been happening yet. So we're trying to get everybody trained up so that as the spring growing season comes on, everybody has an opportunity to jump in and really start collecting data for the project. Tina, were there any questions that
let me unmute folks here. So if anyone wants to ask a question, we'll see if anyone has some questions out there. I hope I unmuted you.
They still look muted.
I did. It says ask all to unmute.
Well, maybe they've muted themselves.
Yeah, they have to unmute themselves, right?
Okay.
I have a question. This is Karen.
Hey, Karen.
Yes, Karen.
So when we make the observations, if we start out in the morning, should we continue doing it in the morning, or can we go out one morning and then 3 days later go out in that afternoon, or how should we do that?
Karen, the beauty of this, if you're using the app, is it will record that for you, and the variety will help the data set. So it really doesn't matter as long as you're using the app. Now, I do tell there is an option to not use the app, but if you use the app, it does a bunch of things for you. But it doesn't matter as long as you log your data in. It will record when it happened and it'll work.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
You bet. Other questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
How can we positively identify a species? Like I have tall goldenrod, or I have goldenrod that's tall. Is it the tall goldenrod? So I just don't know.
Yeah, and you've hit on the one group of plants that are very difficult. I'm available if you want to take photos of it. Send them to me. I can try to see if we can get a species select on it, and get specific about it. Goldenrod is on our list. It is a bit problematic because I think there are 7 different species that are quite common, particularly in North Texas. So that might be one you might want to wait till later to add once you know it a little better and feel fairly comfortable. You can also usually go to your Master Naturalist chapter, and usually there's at least 1 or 2 really good plant people that can help you get an exact ID on that species. And then once you've got that, then you can add it in.
One more question. Oh,
yes.
One more question. We like to take quote unquote wildflower seeds and spread them out on a certain area in our yard, and we get gaillardia, or I think it's called firewheel Indian blanket. How do we know that's the gaillardia you want?
So it is important that you have the species generally. So we've selected species that are fairly common. So the likelihood is if you have the confusing gaillardia may not be as problematic as you may think. Do your best, and usually you can hone in on it once. If you use the seed, they will usually correctly identify the seed. And keep in mind here, if you've planted something, it can still count. It doesn't have to be naturally occurring. So if you've planted a wildscape in your flower bed, those plants still count. You just, when you set up your site, you will tell us that. You would tell us these were planted species. And this happens to me a lot. I'll just share this with all of you. Often you will plant something that you got at a great wildflower or plant sale at Nipsot. You bring it home and it just doesn't like that location. Well, you may have already included it in your site. If it dies, all you do in Nature's Notebook is say it died, and it'll darken that species, that plant specimen for you, and you can add another one that you want to track. So it's very forgiving. The app is very forgiving, and it's very meant to be very fluid for what you want to do with your site as you collect data. Okay.
Thank you.
You bet. Others?
I think Tom Kerwin raised his hand. Tom, do you want to unmute?
Sure. Can you talk a little bit about the training for the observers and the leaders?
Yes. Tina just mentioned there is a class that you can actually go through. It's a series of modules. And anybody that's really into this kind of understanding Nature's Notebook and tracking phenological phenomena over time in this kind of scenario really should consider doing it. It's a great investment. I recommend that plant people should probably go through it just because it helps you understand how plants change over time and how to know when that data could be actionable and valuable. I've been through the project. In fact, I've done it twice now. Tina just went through it. Nancy was on the call earlier. Nancy's been through it as well. If you're a plant person, it's a great thing to do. Tina, maybe you can add to that.
Yeah, within the leadership course is only done certain times, and it's a it's about 80 hours over about 12 weeks. You have modules that you have to do, and then you have a mandatory meeting that you have to attend, at least, most of them, and you'll have deliverables, like I had to create some phenophase guides, so, things of that nature. We have things that we have to do, but it was very helpful, and within it, is the observer certification. You get it by doing the leadership, but you can just do the observer certification, and it's very good. It's really helps you look and think about not just plants, but animals and all of the insects. Yeah. It really helps you kind of think about how to estimate, you're doing a tree, how to do kind of set aside a grid in your head so that you can kind of estimate. And like David said, if you're not sure, they would rather you say, I don't know. Just say, I don't know. I don't know. Even for the first whole year, if you want to say, I don't know, that's perfectly acceptable. So that's not a failure to not know, because we really want good data when we get it. We'd rather have accurate data than just anything. So very helpful, of course.
You allocated 80 hours to the leadership. How much would you allocate to the observer section?
I would say
it's a fraction.
A fraction. I don't remember exactly. I would say I'm going to throw out there 10 to 15. It really wasn't a whole lot. And you can do it whenever. You don't have, there's no time on it. You can just take a module when you want it and do the little test and move on to the next. So
Tom, it's self-paced. And so when you go in and create your profile in Nature's Notebook, the training element is automatically available to you.
Right.
And so when you're ready, you can just, if you've got some downtime, I usually do the training when my plants are not actively growing, blooming, or seeding. Yes. And so it's a great thing to kind of keep Nature's Notebook going forward. I will tell you this, that training is potentially AT eligible. And so you might go to your AT director for your chapter and ask them to look at that. Yeah, see,
we have it approved. We have it's up there. You'll see AT, time to restore, and then you'll just see then, as far as observable time, we have a code for your time, but most weeks you're not going to be spending 15 minutes, so you'll be spending 2 or 3 minutes in your yard, which isn't enough to report the time, or you'll be at Molly Holler and you'll be reporting your time to Molly Holler, that kind of thing. So it's there for meetings, like quarterly meetings and things like that to use. You probably won't use it that much in your weekly, because you're just not going to spend that much time, but the AT time is approved. So
thank you.
Yeah. You bet. Other questions? Well, the training is a great resource. The quarterly calls are a great resource. And then being part of a group that Tina just mentioned is a huge resource as well. Doing this as a collective, as a committee, if you will, is a great way to, talk about data collection problems, issues that species identification can be a real problem in the beginning with some of these species. But then also, what do you do when you want to add diversity? A lot of people start out with just plants. I'm a big butterfly person. I like to understand the insect side of this. So I've got as many insects now in there as I have plants, because I want to be able to document that relationship as it's, and really it's just presence. Are those species there on my wildscape? So
for me, I've been doing hummingbirds. So it's fun. And it's also like, where we're going to be marking in Nature's Notebook these plants, say once a week. If I see bumblebees, I don't necessarily have to put it in Nature's Notebook. That one I might put in iNaturalist and annotate it, because it just happened that day while I was looking at my plant. Oh, there's bumblebees, yay! And so you can kind of do it that way, so.
Also, a question came up earlier, and I'll just share this with you. There was the question of whether, a lot of people already use iNaturalist, and so they feel very comfortable with it. That there's that over time element that makes Nature's Notebook so much more valuable to us. But we've already seen iNaturalist try to help with this phenology data collection. The training that occurred yesterday that's going across the state is meant to try to help us better understand this whole climate change and what it's doing to plants. And the best way to do that is to try to go where we have the most users. And unfortunately, right now, iNaturalist is where we're getting a lot of volume all over the world. And so that's why you're seeing a lot of this phenology being talked about in a number of different applications. I was going to say, Tina, were there any questions in the chat that needed to be addressed?
I don't think so. I think we've kind of talked them. Any
Okay.
Glenn talked that.
Well, thank you so much for having
thank you.
me. I hope it wasn't too much of a guinea pig exercise. I do pay, I'm kind of surprised I was able to get it in under an hour, and it probably felt that way, but hopefully subsequent chapters will get a smoother presentation as we move
You
forward.
did great.
So thank
We
you for doing
did
that.
great. And look forward, you guys. I'll be sending out the video. We'll get the documents from David. As I said, I want you guys to kind of be thinking about it all once you have the information, and I'll pull together kind of a much more interactive call where we can say, I'm thinking about my yard and I've got this growing, and Karen will say, I've got this, and Nancy will say, I've got that, and Tom has something else. So we'll kind of get a call together so we can kind of get a game plan, make sure we're really covering some really important species, because it's a very exciting project, and our chapter's very excited about it. That's why they've approved this time and everything. They see it as a real huge benefit for potential.
Please let me know how I can support y'all.
Okay.
I'm here as a resource. Just let me know how I can do so. I want to be part of your success of the project.
Yeah, you've been great.
Thank you.
All right. Anyone else?
Thank you, David.
You bet. Thank you, Karen.
You guys have a good evening. Take care.
Tom, Sweet, Nancy, thank you for joining. I know y'all have been cheerleaders in your own parts of the state. So we will bring trainings to you as well, and looking forward to it. Thank you so much.
As are we, Dave. Thank you very much.
You bet. Bye-bye.
Bye.